Hello everyone, and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters across the franchised and independent dealer sectors.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast interview. Today we're delighted to welcome back friend of the pod, Steve Young, Managing Director of ICDP, the International Automotive Retailing and After Sales Consultancy. Steve is joining us for the latest in our regular chats about some of the trends impacting the car retailing sector. So lots to catch up since last time you were on the show, Steve. So welcome back to you.
Yeah, it's definitely action-packed at the moment. When we talked about what to cover today, I thought, is that only 3 or 4 weeks? So yes. Lots going on.
And you've still got the rest of the year to go as well. That's we're only halfway through it, and it's moving very, very quickly. I mean, as always, it's good to have you back on, and you know, we thought we'd start by quizzing you on a couple of recent headlines and to get your take on what's happening in the automotive sector right now. So the first one, I mean, starting with the announcement last week that Renault, in its latest OEM, to announce a network cull, and that's obviously following Mercedes, JLR. And it's confirmed that 29 sites will exit the network, taking it from 144 sites to 115, as it also moves to consolidate the number of groups it works with from 54 down to 46. I mean, what's your take on this, and why Renault felt this was necessary at this time now?
Well, I think in general, networks are too dense, and that's not just true of the UK, it's true in general. And the UK, in fact, is actually one of the most efficient markets in terms of new car sales per dealership, you know, in Europe. So we're not the worst case, but we do have a geography that allows for more concentration, perhaps more so than some other markets, a bit more stretched out, some big empty spaces. But we've done some work, with urban science, where we looked at the effect of, much more dramatic cuts than this. And so if you took a typical 120 dealership network in the UK and cut it by half, so you cut it to 60, then the average drive time only went up by 4 minutes. So the drive time that you get from an existing network is way less than the maximum that's acceptable to new car buyers. But there is some sort of credibility gap, a fear of the unknown on the part of the manufacturers to make those sorts of dramatic cuts. And you do need to also address after sales, because after sales is still about convenience more than it's about excitement and emotion and everything that goes with buying a new car. So, clearly it's not great news for those who are terminated, but I would just say it's overdue, and when are the others going to follow at least the same scale, because there is too much cost tied up in the networks, and regardless of agency or not agency, that cost needs to come out. It's wasteful, and it's not generating a return or giving the remaining network the best opportunities to succeed.
Yeah, and I mean, that was going to be the next question in terms of, do we expect other OEMs? And we're not Renault, Mercedes, and JLR. There has been others previously. We know Ford looked at their network, Honda looked at their network previously. And as you say, this not necessarily agency model, but that, the model lineup is changing. We're seeing that consolidation efficiencies. And I suppose the big question with this is, do you think this is leaving opportunities for, the new entrants, such as the Chinese brands and others that are coming to the UK and Europe? Do you think it's giving them the opportunities to enter an established network that others maybe exiting?
I'll come back onto that in a moment, if I may, but just picking up on one point you made about Honda, and also your earlier point about investor consolidation as well. I think if you look at what Honda did, then they sort of majored more on the investor consolidation. So, which to me makes a huge amount of sense. At a time of change, then I would like to have everybody I'm working with in a decent sized room, ideally around the table, the same table. And so investor consolidation makes sense to give you the opportunity to build the future together. But what Honda also did was they then gave the individual investors in each of the market areas that they had more flexibility as to how they actually built the infrastructure there. So what types of sites, traditional dealerships, used car only, handover, test drive, whatever, much more freedom to the investors. They know the geography better. So I think there's an important point about the way that Honda did it, which was important and also unusual. In respect of the Chinese, then obviously for them it's great. They can walk into a market now anywhere in Europe and they will find well qualified investors who've got empty premises or premises where the manufacturer is saying we don't need all of that space anymore, and they can get a great facility effectively on a marginal cost basis, particularly if it's going in multi-brand, but even if it's going to be a solus site, then the cost is sunk. It's been amortized in the books, and they can get a great site, great location, and that's just almost an open invitation for them to move forward in a more effective way than might have been the case 10 years ago.
Now, Steve, another breaking story from this week saw Genesis, Hyundai's premium digital brand, announce it was dipping its toes into the physical world by signing up 7 dealer groups. And that includes some big names because there's Arnold Clark, Pendragon, Ancaster, and Hendy. The number of outlets they'll open between them is unknown at the moment, but Genesis is already saying it will add more. And these, of course, will all operate under agency agreements. Now, previously, Genesis only had these shopping centre outlets and sold online. So do you think this shows the limitation of pure direct sales?
Well, it's a path that's already been trodden by Tesla and others. Some of the Chinese, with the models they have in continental Europe, will follow of that, I'm certain. I think the shopping mall outlets are fine for generating awareness amongst people who are not in the active part of their buying journey, so that they see a brand in a shopping mall, the sort of big destination type shopping malls, and then if they are coming into a purchase journey, they might just sort of say, you know what, I'll have a look at Genesis or I'll have a look at Tesla. But they're not great locations to sell from, and few of the shopping mall outlets actually generate anything like an acceptable sales volume to be financially viable. So you have to consider them as being in part a marketing investment, and that's fine at that stage. But if you look at what Tesla's done, then progressively, and this is not just true in the UK, it's true in Europe, it's true in the States, they have closed shopping mall style outlets and opened simple dealer facilities, in some cases taking over facilities from other brands like Ford and Honda. So the Genesis is only going down that path. So I'm not in the slightest bit surprised that they're going down the path. And also given the Genesis is the premium brand of Hyundai and Kia, which the big groups already have grown to love, then I'm not surprised either that they've been able to attract very credible investors as the partners for that business. I think it's a path that we'll see others do, others follow in the future. Just a migration, launch the brand, migrate into more traditional dealerships, but probably do so under agency. Why would you go straight to franchise if you're starting from a clean sheet of paper?
That's an interesting point, Steve. So do you think this was part of the original plan for Genesis, or is this a pivot in response to maybe lack of sales? I don't know.
I'm not privy to the internal discussions that took place, 3-4 years ago. We've known it's been coming for a while, but whether that was always in the master plan or it's a change of direction, I don't, a pivot, as you say, I don't know. It would certainly be in my plan. I would never assume that primarily direct-to-consumer online channel plus a few shopping mall outlets was going to support any decent volume of sales. And Genesis obviously have got ambitions to build significant volume. They're not talking about selling 1,000 cars.
And I mean, whether it links into to the next question, really. I mean, since last time we spoke, there's the two major foreign acquisitions have taken place, and I think somebody hinted to one of them on the last time we caught up, Steve, about Van Mussel acquiring Jackson's over in the Channel Islands there, and Lithia obviously then bought the Jardines business, and both followed the heading acquisition of some Mercedes-Benz retail group sites last year. Do these aren't necessarily going to be the one-offs, are they? There's a lot of appetite for UK, European growth plans from many of these international investors. I mean, where do you see this heading? And do you think that we're going to see a fairly swift acceleration of some of this larger global international acquisitions across UK and European markets?
We'll definitely see more. I mean, there's no question. And in addition to those, then you've got other, acquisitions, other buyers from South Africa, from the Middle East, from China, Japan, and so on, who also invested in UK retail. So we're going to see more of that. But I think Van Mussel is maybe a bit of an outlier. They've got a very, very large leasing business and have developed a dealer business largely to support leasing. And so you'd think, why on earth would you buy Jackson's? I think because they have a large number of brands, but they're not encumbered with all the real estate and so on that comes with buying a Lookers, or a price that would come from buying a Lookers. So I think the interesting thing that will happen there is probably Van Mussel entering the leasing business in a big way in the UK, supported by Jackson's as someone who gives them a dealer code for many brands. But if you look at people like Lithia and Hedin, then they've made no secret of their ambition to grow. Hedin obviously had a look at Pendragon, backed off, still have a big shareholding there, and you've got to assume that they will come into play. I think anyone in the industry understands there are some issues around a Pendragon deal, but at the same time, I think it would benefit from clear direction, certainty about what's ahead of it, and Hedin may well end up buying it. If they don't, then someone else will come along. That someone else could include Lithia, because Jardines has given them a top-end premium footprint, but Jardines is not the business that it was 5 or 10 years ago. And Lithia for sure will try to expand on that. So do they buy Pendragon? Do they buy Lithia? Do they buy Lookers? Another group? I don't know, but they will certainly buy both Lithia and Hedin, and potentially you've got some others coming in. I think Lookers obviously is in play because of the bid that's been made and accepted by this relatively small Canadian group, but will they be the ultimate buyer? I'd say 50-50, probably not.
Yeah, and as you say there, I think there's I say we mentioned a couple there, and you mentioned the others. There's a lot of appetite at the minute from not just US. There is other markets, and I mean, it was quoted not so long back by, I think it was Matt Lavery, around that there'd be no PLCs left, UK PLCs by the end of this year. Do you think that's lightly looking in that kind of direction? Not necessarily by the end of this year, because these deals do take some time to go through, and you mentioned the Lookers one there that isn't I'd say a done deal at this stage. It's not gone through, but do you think that is looking likely now that you won't have many, if any, standalone PLC UK groups left, or do you think with an opportunity for them to remain and grow?
Well, if we accept that Lookers will go to somebody, then you've only got Pendragon, Virtue, and Caffin's left. Caffin's obviously been much smaller than the others, and I think Robert Forrest has done a great job with his team in building Virtue. But at the end of the day, it's a listed company, and there's no dominant shareholder. So if someone decides that they want to, acquire a business in the UK, taking advantage of exchange rate differences and relatively poor perceptions of motor retail as a class of stock to buy, to value, then Virtue will go as well, and hopefully someone will buy them because of the management that's in place, but no one can stop that happening. And then Caffin's, I just think, as a smaller PLC, nice little niche position, then someone will come along.
Now, Steve, turning to some of your recent blogs, and Phil and I are fans of the blogs that you publish every week. You recently asked the question, can manufacturers who embrace agency actually do retail? And it's a valid question. So tell us what you've been hearing about some of the teething problems OEMs have faced with agency, especially around some of the items you mentioned regarding inventory, demand generation, brand promotion, and pricing. What are you hearing?
Well, I think some of the manufacturers recognized from the beginning that they needed to have retail skills on board. So it was certainly the case with Mercedes. They changed the hiring policy for the NSC, for the National Sales Company in Sweden, right at the very beginning. It wasn't sort of a belated recognition. Volkswagen, I think, recruited into their sort of retail roles, consumer-facing roles last year, but have still not actually, transitioned to agency. But there are other manufacturers who either didn't recognize that, or who recognized it but have been unable to fill the roles. So they are becoming retailers. It is a culture change moving to agency. And if you think that you can achieve that culture change with people whose whole history and background and motivation and skill set is around wholesale and basically beating the dealers up every quarter to hit the numbers, then they're naive. And that really is where the challenge is, because under agency, then, or for that matter, to be honest, any move towards being closer to customers means you need to understand retail. You need to understand that not all customers are the same. Not all customers will obediently go down the one standard journey that you've defined. Not all customers will be happy. Some will come back with complaints that need to be resolved. Some will not fit into the box that you have for your finance offer, and they will need to be addressed, separately. And all of that needs skills that are on board, or you need to take advantage of the skills of the partners that you already have, i.e. the dealers, which is what we see starting to happen now with Stellantis in their pilots, which will launch in September in Benelux. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with Mercedes giving marketing money, local marketing money, to the dealers in the UK. The dealers have spent local marketing money for years. They know which levers have worked for them. Is it not a bit naive to think you should centralize all that decision making and disregard all the experience that sits in the dealers? So it makes sense to use the dealers, but ultimately it doesn't get away from the fact that the manufacturers need to think differently. And one example, not European example, but in one example, there's a manufacturer operating agency. Clearly, somebody felt that this particular model variant was great. It was sexy. It was, showroom appeal. It was something that they wanted to push into the market. And they thought this would be a great product to push out as a demonstrator for that model line. But the dealers hardly ever sold any of those models, and it wasn't because they didn't have them. It was because it was too expensive, not appropriate for the local market. And what they wanted was something much closer to the base end of the product range. End result, the demo cars are sitting there doing nothing because no one's interested in driving them. Too expensive, too overpowered for the market needs. And in due course, they're going to be defleeted and put into the market as second-hand cars for which there'll be no demand. That sort of thing is not something that a dealer does. A dealer will be much more take a much rounder, broader decision as to what to order for demo stock or courtesy car stock. Not just with a view to what helps them to sell the cars, but also with a view to its value as a used car. And that's basic retail thinking that all dealers understand. But some of the manufacturers are demonstrating that they just don't get it. They think they can put in top spec cars and somehow that's what they'll end up selling.
That's an interesting point, Steve. And we know over the years a number of OEMs have dabbled with retailing. They've set up and run their own retailing groups. In your mind, have any of them done it particularly well?
Not really. I mean, we looked at manufacturing retail groups a few years ago, and across Europe, the only two that at the time beat the network average in terms of profitability were Ford Retail, what's now Trust Ford, at the time when Chris Hayden was running it, and Mercedes Retail in the UK. And those were the only two. All the others performed in the bottom half of the league tables in their respective networks. And there's all sorts of factors that could contribute to that. They've got, fancy premises and high cost locations. They get a disproportionate amount of the fleet business. They're the go-to channel to deal with any sort of overstocking or overproduction and so on. But across all of the brands, all of the markets, I think you've got to say that they don't actually get retail in the same way as, if you like, a native-born retailer. So they're not starting in a great place. And what I also find quite peculiar is the exchange of personnel between manufacturer-owned retail groups and the manufacturer's own sales organization is really quite limited. You do occasionally find people who've made that transition. If I was running a car manufacturer with an own retail operation, I would make it an absolute rite of passage. You do not get into the management grades until you've done a stint actually at the front end dealing with real customers. But they don't take advantage of that.
They only wish, Steve. And turning to, there'll be a lot of people listening to this saying, oh God, yeah. But anyway, we'll move on from that. So, I mean, turning to another blog, and you put in it that you were sat in traffic jam looking at the number of white Tesla Model 3s that were around you at the time, and you ask yourself, have we entered the era of what you described as car as a washing machine? I suppose the question is, did you reach a satisfactory answer to that question, Steve?
I think for some customers, then the answer is yes. It is a domestic appliance. It serves a functional need, and as long as it does so at an affordable price, then that's it. That's job done. Fortunately, I think there are many more people who do see it more as a way, as an opportunity to express themselves. I'm not saying they buy a car because they want to express themselves, but if they are going to buy a car, if they are going to spend £300 or £400 a month on something, then they want to do it in a way which they can identify with, and that remains important. Now, we're not talking about people who are buying Ferraris or Porsches or whatever. We've done focus groups where people who had Renault Clios, were saying, and I'm not knocking the Renault Clio, but I'm just saying that for them it was great. It gave them their freedom. It expressed their personality in a way that, for the sake of argument, a Ford, Fiesta or a Fiat, Panda or something didn't. You look at talking about Fiat, you look at Fiat 500s and the huge variety of special editions and fancy color schemes and so on. I don't think people are buying those as washing machines. They're buying it because they think it's a bit fun, it's a bit quirky, it's them in some way.
I mean, to say just on that, I mean, anybody that isn't subscribed to your blogs, then I would highly suggest that, although we're tongue in cheek on that last one around the washing machine, but it's actual facts of the market, it's dynamics of the marketplace. I would advise signing up to get Steve's blogs on a weekly basis, and you can do that by going to the ICDP website. Can't get my words out today, and that's icdp.net, and it's a simple subscription, and you can get those newsletters as well as have a look at everything else that ICDP do have to offer. So, I mean, all it means to say is, we've gone into quite a few different areas there, and probably left a lot of food for thought on some of the topics covered. But just again, can't believe it's only 3 or 4 weeks since we last spoke, and how much has gone on since then, Steve. So very much looking forward to when we catch up next time, and what's been happening since then. You never know. We'll see who's buying, see who's selling, see what's happening with some of these manufacturers and the dealer market, eh?
I certainly don't think we'll have a quiet summer. That's for sure. It's a lot going on every level. So we look forward to catching up again. But thanks for the invitation.
Well, that's all for now. Many thanks for joining us for this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast. Thanks once again to Steve for joining us today. We're back with the headlines on Saturday. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to this special weekday Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. Philip and Curtis will be back with the week's big motor retailing headlines on Saturday. Live, on demand, wherever you are, and on your podcast feed. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with Philip and Curtis, come on the show or send a press release, then email them at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. You can also join the Motor Trade Radio, LinkedIn and Facebook groups, or follow the podcast on Twitter. You've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, bringing you all the chatter that matters.